We're good. Can everybody see the proper full-on share screen? You'll have to unmute because I made you small.
Yep, you're good.
Not presenter view or anything. Okay. All right, so I'm really excited today. We are moving into the amniotes. So we are moving into a part of the tree that has so much of the biodiversity that I know you guys think of when you think of vertebrates. So we've done so much time on fishes and then a little touch on amphibians. So now we're talking about amniotes, and the first group of amniotes we're going to talk about are the mammals. And so this little marsupial here on the screen, I think, is a really good kickoff point for mammals. Like, most mammals are pretty small-bodied, scurrying animals. Most of the biodiversity of mammals looks something like this. This one is a marsupial. So if you guys remember what a marsupial is, you probably learned it at some point. It's, got the pouch. And this one's actually a glider, a sugar glider. So it can jump from tree to tree and has skin between its arms and legs for so little love for amphibians. I'm going to keep looking at the chat, so feel free to put stuff in the chat. I don't mean to say so little love for amphibians, Andy. You're definitely right. There's a reason I showed you all those frogs, because they are great. Okay, let's get into it. So here is our phylogeny, kind of where we left off. You guys learned a whole bunch of different characters, 5 of them for the tetrapods. So all of the animals, vertebrate animals on land. So dominated by their limbs. So they have 4 limbs, 2 in the front, 2 in the back, 4 limbs and hind limbs that they walk around on land on. And we saw the amphibians kind of for the last half an hour or so last Thursday. And I think it's very fun, and it definitely was intentional that the first tetrapod group we talked about in terms of biodiversity were the caecilians, which are the completely legless, they've lost all their limbs, amphibians. And so you guys are going to see there are plenty of tetrapods that don't have 4 feet, that they have lost them in other ways. Nobody has more than 4, but certainly they've lost some. So just like we've seen all these splits, vertebrates split into gnathostomes and cyclostomes. Gnathostomes split into chondrichthyes and osteichthyes. Osteichthyes splits into sarcopterygia and actinopterygia. We're up here in tetrapoda. Tetrapoda splits into amphibians. So Lis amphibia is the clade of the living amphibians. And then the other side of tetrapods is amniota. And so amniotes, you guys know really well. These are the reptiles and birds and the mammals. Those are our amniotes. There are several features, just 2 I'm going to give you guys, though, to know about for amniotes. These are features, synapomorphies, shared derived features of amniotes that I want you to have in your mind. The first and foremost is the amniotic egg. This is what these animals are really known for. So I think you guys did a really excellent job on Thursday when we talked about anatomical and maybe some physiological and behavioral changes you might see going from a aquatic habitat, so something like what a fish tries to do all day, to living up on land. And so you guys thought of things about respiration, desiccation, locomotion, structural support. One of the things we didn't talk about was reproduction. And so you guys might know that there are plenty of amphibians today, things like frogs and salamanders, that, individual species can be pretty well adapted to living in dry or hot places, desert adapted amphibians. And so the adults can handle living on land and living in those habitats just fine. But amphibians are still absolutely tied to the water for their reproduction. They lay eggs that have not really any kind of hard shell. It's just kind of like a jelly kind of sac. And a lot of fishes and a lot of the animals we've talked about so far in this whole class reproduce in the water. Amniotes are this clade of tetrapods that is the exception to that. So the amniotic egg is an egg that has a hard shell. Usually, a lot of the shells are soft. So those little baby pythons you can see in that picture are hatching out of eggs that are what we would say leathery. They're soft eggs. So an amniotic egg has nothing to do with whether it has a hard shell or whether it even has a shell at all. The amniotic egg has everything to do with one of the structures within the egg. You guys, whether or not you realize it, have seen hints of amnions before every time you've cracked open a chicken egg to make scrambled eggs or something like that for breakfast. So an amniotic egg is an amniotic egg because there's this one tissue layer called the amnion that's surrounding the embryo. So just to orient you guys on this picture here, that's a little embryo of a baby something, I don't know what. All tetrapod embryos look really similar at early stages. So in its egg, and so you can see there's a yolk sac. You guys definitely know about egg yolks. So that's all the nutrients that the baby is going to have feeding it while it's developing inside of its mother. And then there's that other structure called the allantois, which is the waste deposit area. So as the yolk sac drains, the allantois fills because the baby's metabolism is processing as it's growing. So neither of those things are special to amniotes. A lot of other animals have those. What's special to amniotes is that one that's circled, the amnion. And that is a very, very, very specialized little sac that creates like a little pond, a little safe space for the embryo to develop. And so you can think it's like analogous to those frog eggs that are in a pond. This is like a teeny little pond for just the embryo to form in. So the amnion forms from like some of those same embryonic cells. Like if we go back to talking about the deuterostomes having anus form first, and then there's an ectoderm and a mesoderm and an endoderm. Bits and pieces of ectoderm and bits and pieces of mesoderm derived cells are what make the amnion. So it's a really, really specialized vertebrate structure. Only amniotes have it to make a little pond for the baby to develop in. It's a really, really, really incredible thing. And it's cool to know that like those little baby crocodiles over there and that little baby echidna, that little pink thing that's hatching out of an egg, that is a little baby mammal. That is not a reptile at all. That's a little baby echidna, a monotreme mammal that we're going to talk about today, hatching out of its egg, because there are, as some of you probably know, still mammals today that don't have live birth. There are still mammals today that lay their eggs. So this like amniotic egg is ancestral for all of amniotes. So that's that. I hope that's cool. And again, any questions or anything like that, put it in the chat, raise your hand. The other feature, anatomical feature, that you guys should definitely know about amniotes is skull fenestration. So unlike things like fishes, and certainly like most, well, not most, but a lot of amphibians, amniotes are eating in air. They're eating in dry land. They don't have the benefit of living in a fluid medium to help them process their food or take in their food. They've got jaws that are powerful, and they've got jaws that they use to process their food a lot more than something in the oceans or in a lake might. So here's a simple drawing of a skull. So orbit is the eyeball. You can see the nostril on the right of like an early vertebrate tetrapod coming up onto land. And there's different colors there for different bones of the skull. You don't have to worry about those, but jugal, jugal and squamosal and parietal, these are the names for those bones. And so there's an orbit, and there's two patterns we see in amniote evolution. And it's actually one of the ways that for centuries, people have been able to tell the earliest reptiles apart from the earliest mammals. So the things I just showed you, the fossils I've been collecting in Africa, they're on the mammal line. One of the reasons we know this and knew this 150 years ago was because of these fenestra. Fenestra is a word that means windows. It's openings for where jaw muscles can attach. And so on one side of amniota, there are the reptiles that are diapsid. They've got two holes behind the eye, an upper one and a lower one for the jaw muscles to attach onto. And then mammals like you and me, we are synapsids. So we have just a single hole, a single temporal fenestra back behind our eyeball for our jaw muscles. And so you guys do have this hole. I know I can't see you, and it's more fun when we can all see each other. But what I would like you to do right now is to like put your fingers on the sides of your face and open your jaw up and down as much as you want. You can feel your jaw muscles flexing. And then as you raise your hands up along the side of your head, you're going to hit like a bony bridge where you can't feel the muscles anymore. And if you keep going, you can do your temples, you can feel the jaw muscles attaching. And so in a lot of mammals today, that hole is not an opening on the side like it is in a lot of the earliest relatives of mammals, but it is now turned sort of up vertically. So the jaw muscles pass through it rather than like come up and like attach on the side. So you are a synapsid, and almost all reptiles and birds today, well, not all reptiles and birds, they certainly ancestrally were diapsid, but some of them have specialized to where those holes are kind of hard to figure out. But definitely this condition of having a postorbital, so behind the eye, fenestra for jaw muscle attachment, absolutely an amniote feature. Just to show it to you, here's a great diapsid, a good reptile. So this is Stegosaurus, the dinosaur. And there are on either side of the head, an upper on the top of the head and a lower on the side temporal fenestra. So two holes in that Stegosaurus dinosaur reptile. And then over here is an amniote that is on the mammal line. So this is Dimetrodon. It's an early synapsid, just like the ones I'm holding here. So this is a more closely related to you synapsid. And it also has this one big hole for jaw muscle attachment. And so that is the synapsid condition there on Dimetrodon. One hole, two holes. I'll leave that there for a second. All right. I didn't get to show you this last week, and so I'm showing it to you now. I know I'm dating myself a little bit. You guys don't think of the killers all that much, but I do when this is one of my favorite memes from like whatever, 2010. And I'm just going to make you look at it because it's important to me. I think it's funny. Amniotes are so morphologically diverse, so disparate in their shape and their function. It's crazy. Everything in the ocean that is a vertebrate is pretty much a fish, and it looks kind of like a fish. And then all the amniotes that have gone back into the ocean, like ichthyosaurs, like dolphins, basically look like fish again because of the adaptive pressures of the ocean. But up here on land, there is some insane biodiversity of shape, and they are all derived, as you know, from sarcopterygian fishes. So you can enjoy that for yourself later if you want. All right. So there's our amniotes. You now have two characters, the temporal fenestration and the amniotic egg, that unite all of these different animals that are still colored up here on the top of the screen. But today we're going up into the mammals. So mammalia, you guys are mammals, and we are just one half. Not in terms of species, we are way less than half of species, but one half in terms of the deep split of amniota is mammals. As you might imagine, I've got 5 different characters I'm going to give you for Mammalia. I could also give you many more. I am going to stop the share for just a second. And I'm going to send you guys into a breakout room for a few minutes here. Go ahead and talk to each other, whoever you end up in the breakout room with. What are going to be characters for mammals, synapomorphies that unite all of Mammalia? All right, so almost everybody's back. Can people from the different rooms unmute? What are some ideas we had? What are we talking about for some mammal synapomorphies?
We were talking about fur, sweat glands, and along that line, milk, and the synapsid skull fenestration.
Okay. So a synapsid skull, the single opening, sweat glands, interesting, and fur. What other things were being talked about?
Our group had four-chambered heart and potentially internal fertilization to add to that.
Interesting. Okay. Other features people have? Did anybody hear one just now that was from the other group that they have a question about or they're not sure?
Aren't there fish who have internal fertilization and other non-mammal things?
Yeah. So I'll talk about that one. So internal fertilization, having an egg be fertilized inside the body of usually the female animal, is definitely an amniote feature primitively. So all the birds and reptiles share with mammals an evolution of internal fertilization. I didn't give it to you a minute ago for amniotes. It's absolutely part of a terrestrial living. You can't broadcast spawn your eggs in the air. Usually I don't think that's ever evolved. Plants do it with like pollen kind of. But yeah, no vertebrate animals that I could think of. And then of course, Addison, you're right. There's plenty of fish that have evolved it too. So it can be, internal fertilization can be or details of the anatomy of something like that can be a synapomorphy for a group. And so some detail of mammal fertilization is, synapomorphic for mammals, special to mammals. And then you'd have the bigger idea of internal fertilization, is also evolved independently in fishes. And it can be a synapomorphy like I gave you guys when I gave you class birds for like chondrichthyes. So internal fertilization, like any feature, can evolve a couple of different times or many, many different times and still be a synapomorphy for each. It's about identifying evolutionary events when we talk about these features, not like only mammals have fur, although that one kind of is true. But internal fertilization is way more widespread. And I'll tell you guys, internal fertilization is not a mammal synapomorphy that I'm going to give you at all, because like I said, our internal fertilization that we have in our reproductive mode is shared with all the reptiles and birds, all the amniotes. All right, well, I'm going to give you some features so that we can kind of get in here a little more. All right, everybody can see it? Thumbs up. I need at least a little bit so I don't just keep going and have you guys can't see anything. Where we left off?
We can see it.
Okay, good. Just want to make sure. All right, so 5 characters from Amelia. None of you said the first one I'm going to give you, which is that the dentary, the tooth-bearing bone of the mandibles. The lower jaw is sometimes called the mandible. It's made up of many, many, many different bones. In fishes, it's tons of bones. In reptiles and birds, it's many different bones. But in mammals, truly, it is only one bone. That bone is called the dentary. That bone is the same bone that is shared with all osteichthyans that have teeth on the lower jaw. So a bowfin and a barracuda have teeth on their dentary. You have teeth on their dentary. That part is a synapomorphy for osteichthyes. But the dentary, being the only bone in the lower jaw, is a mammal feature, which is really, really interesting and very cool. Many of those other bones, what we would call post-dentary bones, are still present in your body. And it's actually the second feature I'm going to give you. You have 3 bones in your middle ear. So the bones that take sound from your eardrum, and then it travels through those bones, they all vibrate, and then it goes into your inner ear where you actually have like fluid and you hear things in your inner ear. There's a bridge of 3 bones in your middle ear, the malleus, the incus, and the stapes, that are completely unique to mammals. And in fact, the stapes is a bone that used to be in your skull. And the incus and the malleus are bones that used to be in your lower jaw. The two animals I showed you guys at the beginning of class here from like pre-dinosaur times, they've got huge versions of these bones called things like the articular. And so it is one of the great stories in animal evolution that we can see bones from the lower jaw as we go through time in mammal evolution. The dentary becomes the only bone of the lower jaw, and the bones that were behind the dentary become the bones of the mammalian inner ear. So we have a very, very different kind of hearing than any other land-living tetrapod. Birds and reptiles hear completely different from us, and some of them can't actually hear very well at all. We can hear really well in a lot of ways, and we have these totally unique bones. They used to be jaw bones, which is super insane. So this is something we've known about for like well over 100 years, and it's like one of like the great stories of evolution. And if this was a paleo class, we'd spend some time on it, but I'm just going to tell you it now. There's 3 bones in your middle ear. Give that a Wikipedia if you want. It's very cool. A third feature for mammals is heterodonty, so different teeth. Plenty of vertebrates have evolved so that there's different kinds of teeth in different parts of your mouth. That's generally fine, like different kinds of teeth for sure. Mammals have evolved with very specific teeth, a suite of teeth that they all share and adapt in different ways. So you guys have incisors, canines, premolars, molars. And so all mammals share teeth like that. Maybe they've lost some of them, maybe they've added more, but they still have this basic structure to adapt to very specialized diets. That is not true for other groups of vertebrates. And so those presence of those kind of teeth, incisors and canines, premolars and molars, that is the great adaptive advantage of like mammals in terms of diet. A lot of mammal ecology can be figured out from like a single molar. If we find one molar of an animal, it can actually tell us tons about its diet because animals like mammals are so highly evolved to their diet. So we've got dentary is the only bone of the lower jaw, 3 bones in the middle ear, heterodonty. These are not the things you guys said a minute ago, which I'm very happy about. Of course, yes, one of the features for mammals is sweat glands. So we have this sort of smooth skin, right? We don't have scales or like an armor on our bodies. We have like a soft kind of skin that has a lot of anatomy in it, like a whole lot. Mammal skin is very derived, like membranous skin. So one of the things embedded in our dermis and then goes up through our epidermis are these things called sweat glands. It's a way mammals can regulate their temperature. So water is a really good conductor of heat. And so what you can do when you get hot is your body will put water in these tubes that go up to your surface of your skin. And then as that water gets evaporated off, it's sucking heat off your body. Nobody else on land is sweating. There are animals that do other things, but you and all other mammals can sweat. That is a really specialized feature. Now, Andy kind of alluded to this. Mammals have taken that ancient feature of sweat and done something completely insane with it, and that is evolved lactation. So mammals take nutrients and proteins and fats, and they mix it up with the sweat on certain parts of their bodies. And then female mammals have these things called nipples. Not all mammals have nipples. We're going to talk about that, where all those ancestral sweat glands, which is what they are condensed into a single place. And then a baby that usually has high levels of parental care and input, that's also a mammally thing, can suckle from the mother and grow and get nutrients. So the milk that absolutely unites all mammals is an extremely derived form of sweat gland. So these are kind of 2 different features, but they're related. So I'm giving it to you. We're going to talk about mammal diversity here in a second. And so marsupials and placental mammals like you and me, we all have nipples, and females usually are feeding their babies with their breasts and with their nipples. But other mammals like monotremes, so something like the platypus, definitely has the sweat glands that make milk, but they don't have nipples. So a female platypus just kind of sweats out some milk into a patch of fur on her underside, and then the baby just kind of laps it up from the fur. But there's no like central duct. There is no nipple on a platypus or any other kind of egg-laying mammal, which I just think is one of those really fun things. And if you never knew about it, congratulations. They kind of sweat some milk into a patch of hair. And then, of course, I'm going to give you this one. Another part of that pretty derived dermis, outer skin layer on mammals, is hair. So a keratin structure, sometimes ever growing. And the thing I want you guys to know about for hair is that, of course, hair can be extremely adaptable. And so we use hair for all kinds of things: signaling, style, defense. There's plenty of mammals with pretty derived hair to defend themselves with. There's lots of evolutions of things like quills and spines that are all derived hair. And so I want you to realize that, like, hair maybe as a baseline is a feature, but then all different lineages of organisms can do things with it. Like that wolf is communicating right there. And so there's interesting things that happen once you have a feature like hair. It becomes a display structure. It's a thermal insulator, all kinds of cool stuff. All right, now we are in the phylogeny part of mammal time. So this is the biodiversity party. And so here is the phylogeny I'm going to start with for Mammalia. If you don't know all these animals, that's definitely okay. Just like always, all I'm trying to do is expose you guys to biodiversity so that just in case there's something you haven't heard of before, you can follow up with any interest you might have. And so here's our 3 big groups of mammals. On the right there, it's a platypus and echidna, we're going to talk about in a second. And the fox there in the middle is representing you and all the placental mammals. And then over there on the far left, those are all the marsupial mammals. So mammals with a pouch. So there's your 5 mammal features coming up on the right. The first group we're going to talk about today are the monotremes. And so there's an echidna, which is also called sometimes the spiny anteater, and the platypus. Those are the only monotremes that are still alive today. Anybody have any monotreme things they want to share? Besides, I already told you that they sweat a milk patch.
Do they lay external eggs?
Yeah, these are the mammals that lay eggs. So echidnas and platypuses, monotremes together, they lay eggs. These are the mammals that do not have live birth. There is still internal fertilization of those eggs, just like in like a lot of lizards, but then the female will lay eggs that they take care of and, have in a little burrow. And then those eggs hatch into little babies that are like totally helpless. Very, very different reproductive structure than most of the mammals we have today. So here's where monotremes are today. They're sort of restricted to the relative island continent of Papua New Guinea and Australia during the Ice Age, when the ocean levels come up and down and up and down and up and down. New Guinea and Australia are one place. And so you can see there's about a couple species of echidna, 3 on New Zealand. Sorry, 3 on, no one is in New Zealand, 3 on New Guinea and 1 on mainland Australia, whereas the platypus is only on mainland Australia and then down there in the bottom, Tasmania on Australia. So they are restricted to Australia and New Guinea today. If we go back into the fossil record, there's some monotremes that are in like South America and places like that too. But today they're only here, stuck on that island continent, relatively isolated. The first one we'll talk about is the platypus. The platypus is truly one of like the great animals that's alive right now. I'm so pleased that this is a living thing that you could like get in a truck and like go look for it in a river and like maybe just see it in someone's backyard in Australia. It's fantastic. One thing I like about the platypus is that like when European explorers were in areas like Australia for the first time and making natural history collections, there was a platypus that got sent back to Europe and was like destroyed because the people who received it in Europe assumed it was a fake, like somebody just like put some stuff together and was like, it wasn't a real animal, we're not supposed to keep this, it's like a joke. And people would be like, no, this is a real organism. So things I like for you guys to know about platypuses is they are semi-aquatic, they're swimming animals, they're very much living in lakes and streams in Australia. They have an electrosensitive bill, so they swim around and they can sense the electrical fields of like little invertebrates like worms and snails and things like that they gobble up. Males are venomous, and I think it's only the males. There's a spine on their ankle, so one of their heel bones, one of their tarsal bones has evolved this like long spine that has venom in it. So this is one of the few venomous mammals on top of being like a little beaver thing with a duck face. And then another thing that's just very, very fun about them is we'll have Dr. Pradhan come into lab a little bit later in the semester and talk about things like sexual diversity in terms of different groups of vertebrates. And one of my favorite things is that male platypuses have a ridiculous amount of sex chromosomes. So most mammals have two. You are, might be XX or you might be XY. Well, a male platypus is XY, 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 which is just, I'm not really quite sure why that is, but it's something that's measurable and true for platypuses. This is just a cool figure from a paper showing the electrical field that exists around the bill of all platypuses. So when they're swimming around through the water, they have this envelope of detection. And so little invertebrates, I think sometimes like very tiny fishes that might come into their field of sensory, they'll gobble them up. And I hope you can see on that drawing, it's a little easier than the photos, like what their hands really look like. So you can see that like their fingers and their toes, and it's really their hands that are intense, kind of end in a place that you might expect. They're kind of big, but then they have these like paddles that are much longer than their actual digits, which is really freaky. These are very weird animals. The other thing that came out a few years ago that like I don't know what to do with, and I think a lot of people don't know what to do with, is that the fur of platypuses fluoresces under UV light. And so some platypuses have the ability to see a little bit of UV light, and the fact that they kind of glow under UV light makes everybody be like, oh my God, because that means like they can communicate with each other in ways we didn't know. Or, maybe that's for seeing each other in the murky water, who knows? But I just think another weird fact for you guys to take home about platypuses is something insane like that. The other group of monotremes are the echidnas. And so these are the 4 species of echidna. The one on the bottom left is the short-beaked echidna. That is the one that is in Australia, and so easily the most abundant and numerous of all the echidna species. The other 3 all live in the jungles of New Guinea. And so echidnas are animals people don't usually see all that much. I would love for you guys to unmute and make an observation about echidnas, because they are totally crazy and really fun.
I have a quick question.
Yeah.
Where do pangolins fit in?
Oh, we'll get
there. Is that the same group or is that different?
Oh, no, not at all the same group. But that's a great thing that you to bring up. Thanks for bringing that up. We're going to talk about pangolins. That's a different group of mammals that are interestingly like this.
Are those massive spines like adapted fur?
Yeah, so especially on the short-beaked echidna where it's like super dense, those are specialized hairs that form into extremely tough quills. Like they don't detach from the body or anything like that. They are just spikes, but they are very sharp and very stout. Yes, they are derived fur.
Since it's called short-beaked, are those actually beaks or what's going on with their mouth?
No. So their mouth is at the very, very end of that very long face. And so their little nose. I think you can see that one's called short beaked because the other ones have quite long faces. But they're not like beaks in the sense like turtles and birds have, a bony projection of their face with keratin beak on top of it. These aren't like that. These are soft tissue. That little nose can like sniff around like a mammal nose. So it's not really a beak.
Is the location of their spines relevant to like their ecology or like where they're surviving?
That's a great question. I don't really know that. So I know the short-beaked echidna lives all over Australia where there's like tons of like marsupial predators. There's definitely predators on New Guinea too, but as I was thinking about it, I was like, there's definitely not that as many. So I'm wondering if the short-beak is just like super well, like, because they do a hedgehog thing. They just go into a ball when they're threatened, and then it's a spike ball that you can't eat. So we're going to talk about that a little later. Anyway, I hope you saw the feet. Look at the feet of the one that's running, and then the short beak. There's a humongous claw that's like curved backwards. Their feet are like totally smashed. They're so weird, and I'm so happy that they are living things that you can go see if you want to. I love them. And so there's the face a little clearer, and there's the spines a little clearer, and there's a young one a little clearer. But yeah, they've got really long tongues. A lot of them are like insect specialists. The short beak especially like just busts into ant nests and then slips its tongue down there and sucks up a bunch of ants and then goes home and lays an egg in a burrow. So these are very, very interesting, very weird mammals. And so you can see, I hope that mouth is at the very end. So it's not really a beak. It's just a very long, very long face. All right, so that's echidnas. The one thing I didn't say, and I'll say it now, is the monotreme. We're going to talk about that later in the class, so I'm not going to focus on it too much now. But that name, monotremata, so tremata is sewer, and mono is one. And so the reason they have that name is there is, I guess for now, what I'll say is there's one hole at the back of a monotreme, so a platypus or an echidna. And so they, any kind of waste, defecation or urination, and all reproduction happens out of one hole. Now those, if you go inside that hole, there are then 3 other holes where those things come from within the body. But on the outside of the body, there's just one. So it's a pretty unpleasant thing to imagine, but they only have one exit to their body. And that's why they're called monotremes. Okay, so now going over towards Theria. So Theria is the monophyletic clade. I want you guys to know Theria, that unites marsupials and placentals. So everything on this slide is a mammal, but the therians are the marsupial mammals and the placental mammals, not the monotremes. And so there's one feature that I want you all to have that unite therians. So Theria means beast. So like, this is like kind of like, you can almost think of it as like, it's very much close to meaning mammals if there weren't platypuses and echidnas, beasts. And the thing that unites all therians is that when they reproduce, they have a placenta. And so placenta is an even more derived version of the amniotic egg, where the like yolk sac part of the egg is integrated with the uterine wall of the mother. So the mother's uterus is entwined with the nutrient cycling of the baby. And so there is direct communication between the mother's body, her blood supply really, and the developing fetus. And so a placenta is a feature that all therian mammals share. It's a very ancient feature amongst mammals. And so that placenta is like kind of part of that egg. And so you don't usually see it, right? I think I find that a lot of students like, or people who maybe haven't had a child of their own, knowing that the placenta isn't like attached to the mother, the umbilical cord isn't attached to the mother into like her body, it's attached to the placenta, the umbilical cord is. And so that baby human there, the placenta came out in one piece, you know, wasn't cut or anything like that. And so you can see then this sort of like waist sac and, you know, placental connection with the mother that's still attached to this baby. So if you guys go back to that drawing of the amniotic egg, that's exactly what we do. It's just, it's retained within the body of the mother and in mammals. And so I think what surprises people is that marsupial mammals also have the same placenta. The difference is the time of birth. So in placental mammals, the baby is retained within the body for a lot longer in terms of time usually, and certainly longer in terms of development. The baby is more on its way to being its own organism by the time it is actually physically born in a placental mammal. In a marsupial mammal, the baby is born very small. So the baby, like that baby kangaroo, that little wormy thing there is a baby kangaroo. It exits the mother's vagina when it's very small. And then it, on its own, with only its forelimbs, only its arms, climbs her fur to go up into a pouch. And that's something that only marsupials have. And inside the pouch, that's where the marsupial nipples are for the baby to like latch onto and basically like finish developing. So it's very different than what placental mammals do, but the placenta itself is the same between placental mammals and marsupial mammals. And the difference might be better thought of as how early or late the baby emerges from the mother. Just super cool, super interesting. So placenta is a feature of all therians. All right, in terms of biodiversity, now it is time for the marsupial mammals. There is, of course, a feature of marsupialia that I want you guys to have. I really hope this one isn't a challenge. I'm sure when you study, you won't have to worry too much about the marsupial feature. It is, in fact, the marsupium, which is the technical name for the pouch that all female marsupials have. So the baby is born when it's very young, and then it has to climb up the fur all on its own from its mother's vagina into the pouch where it latches onto a nipple and keeps on developing. And so you guys probably know, of course, you've seen kangaroos, especially, right? The little joeys, especially when they become like toddlers and they can still like go back and forth to the pouch and get in there. And she has to be like, oh God, and like carry them around. And they're definitely like almost ready to be done going in and out of her body. That feature is a very much marsupial feature. What you're seeing there on the ground, that actual photo, not like a cute drawing, is a mother wombat, and she's obviously taken a break. So wombats are another kind of marsupial. And I hope you can see how huge her pouch is. You can see her baby looks like pretty ready. Like that wombat Joey needs to probably get out of there pretty soon. So it's funny, I've heard like female or mothers, I should say, like mother biologists talk about like, yeah, I wish I was a marsupial because having a baby would be so easy to like have the baby. And then they're like, yeah, but I guess I'd really hate it if like up until they were like 3 years old, they could jump into a skin pouch I had on my body. So it's like tomato, which one's better? I'm not sure for having mammal reproduction where you put so much into one or two offspring at a time, which I think is pretty funny. So the pouch is the marsupial feature. And now we're going to do some marsupial biodiversity. There are 7 orders of marsupials. So 7 different, totally distinct clades, orders of marsupials. Here's the first one, didelphimorphs. You can see there's about 108 didelphimorphs. Your Idaho marsupial, which is the Virginia opossum, there on the left with all those babies hanging onto her back, that is a didelphimorph, so an opossum. These are the only marsupials really in the continental United States. If you go into Central America and then all the forests in South America too, that's where almost all didelphian diversity is. So these early possums, and there's plenty of them. It's not just the Virginia opossum. As we're doing biodiversity, like always, I really encourage you guys to like unmute or ask a question or say something, because otherwise I just want to like ask you on every slide. And I'd much rather follow questions or hear something if you like know something or have a question, like that pangolin question earlier. So here's didelphimorphs. They are mostly living in trees. A lot of them have very varied diets, definitely some like fruit eating and some a lot of bug eating. I don't really know if there's any didelphimorphian carnivores. I don't think so. But anyway, those are didelphimorphs.
Are Australian possums in didelphimorphia?
No, didelphimorphs today are only in South America and North America.
Okay.
There's a very, very, very awesome didelphimorph fossil from 50 million years ago from Australia, but they don't live there anymore. Here's a very species poor order of marsupials. These are called the shrew opossums. And kind of like we saw with frog diversity on Thursday, like humans definitely have pretty limited like naming abilities sometimes, where they're like, it's a possum and it looks like a shrew. So even though it's its own thing completely from both of those, we're going to call it the shrew opossum. These are also only in South America. They're little insectivores that root around in the ground. So you can see this one's down there in the moss, eating things like worms and bugs. So these are pretty interesting little nocturnal marsupials. They certainly operate a lot like shrews, but they are their own thing. This order is one of the most famous mammal orders because there's only one single species in it, one single animal species in this whole order of marsupials. So the Microbiatheria is one thing, and its name in Spanish, because it also only lives in in South America, I think only in Peru, but it might be in Bolivia too, is the Manito del Monte, which translates to the little monkey of the mountain, if you don't speak Spanish. And so it's a very small little marsupial that lives up in the trees. And the thing that's really, really important about the Manito del Monte is that it looks like kind of the other South American marsupials that you guys have seen so far. But when we look at some of its anatomy, actually, but also very much its DNA, and we compare that to the DNA of all the other groups of marsupials, we see something really interesting that helped scientists a few decades ago kind of sort out some of the big patterns in the ancient evolution and biogeography of marsupials. And so I'm going to put this up here. This is a phylogeny. So of all the 7 orders of marsupials that are alive today, you can see the phylogeny there. I think you can figure that part out on your own, how the trees work. So you've met the didelphimorphs and you've met the shrew opossums, the Posse tuberculata. And now you see the Microbiatheria, so Dromaeosaurus right there. Because Dromaeosaurus is the genus name. Manito del Monte is the fun common name, and it is the only species in Microbiatheria. See where it goes there. And then I would encourage you to take a minute and look at this and try to interpret what this figure is trying to say about marsupial evolution. So like nobody unmute for a second, like everybody take your time. I won't do breakout rooms quite for this. And just talk about this figure because it's a really, really cool thing. Or think about this figure. It's a really cool thing. We're going to take a minute. All right, can I have somebody who has not ever, please, seen this figure before, give me some interpretation of what this figure is trying to show?
What I took away from it is it looks like it's representing like the different colors. It's like two different places of Australia, possibly, that then like one has diverged more based on their location versus the other.
Yeah, so I mean, so can anybody else want to build off of that? I'll say.
It looks like it's showing like as species moved from the Americas to Australia.
Yeah. So, I mean, you guys can imagine, right? Like if you're a biologist today, you might expect that there's like 3 orders of marsupials in South America and 4 in Australia, and that there's going to be a clade of South American marsupials and a clade of Australian marsupials. And there certainly is a clade of Australian marsupials. All the ones we're about to talk about, we haven't talked about them yet, are in Australia. But the South American marsupials are paraphyletic. Dromaeosaurus, the Manito del Monte, is sister to all the Australian things. And then sister to that clade has the shrew possums. And then sister to all of them is the opossums. And those first 3 groups are only in South America. So that lets us build a hypothesis about like, oh, did marsupial evolution, like the evolution of today's marsupial diversity, was it centered in South America? And then a clade or a lineage moved into Australia, and there's a whole nother radiation in Australia. Do you see how the phylogeny like helps us like understand that? Like this is based on DNA and where these animals live today. And so it's really cool because some of you might be wondering like, well, how do you get between South America and Australia? Those places are so far apart. And the answer, like 50 million years ago, is through Antarctica. Antarctica wasn't frozen back then and actually was still in close connection to the bottom of South America and wasn't so far from Australia. And what's incredible is that there are fossils, very few, but there are a couple fossils from Antarctica from 50 million years ago that are some of these early kinds of marsupials. So moving across the bottom of the planet between South America and Australia. It's just super cool, super fun. If anybody wants to do their project or look at the Manito del Monte, I'll totally applaud. They have tons of crazy things about them. I don't have time to talk about it because it's just one species, but do yourself a favor and look into the very cute Manito del Monte if you so choose. All right. Going into the rest of the marsupials, there's a clade name here that I think makes a lot of sense. It's the Australadelphians. And so the southern marsupials, that's what southern means, is austral means southern, so Australia. And so the Manito del Monte is technically an Australadelphian marsupial, even though it lives in South America, so a southern marsupial. The rest of the Australadelphians that are the ones that you guys probably think of when you think of marsupials that aren't possum. And so here's Diprotodonts, easily the most species-rich order of marsupials today. So Diprotodonts is 2 forward-facing teeth. All Diprotodonts have 2 teeth on the lower jaw that stick straight out the front. And so here's a lot of our most famous marsupials. So I'll let this sit for a minute. Anybody wants to unmute or say anything or ask a question, please do, because this is a great group of mammals.
What is the difference between possum and opossum?
That's just the way humans use our common names to differentiate these 2 different groups. So opossums are the like tree dwelling generalist marsupials of South America, and people use the word possum in Australia and I think in New Guinea a little bit to just talk about tree dwelling marsupials there. But those ones are diprotodonts, so a completely different order of marsupials. So those possums are related to koalas and wombats and tree kangaroos, whereas opossums are their own thing, if that makes sense. But look at the different ecologies here. There's open grassland inhabitants. There's absolute, like, koalas, which like sleep all day and eat toxic plants. There's gliders. There's all kinds of cool diversity within Diprotodontia. Wombats, which are like burrowers. Yeah, Andy says every single one is adorable. That's an interesting thing. Is that true for all of them? I don't know. Is the koala adorable? Some people think so. Look at the koala's hand if you haven't yet. Look at his hand. Very cool. Very fun. All right, so Diprotodontia, those are our most diverse group of marsupials. One of my favorite, there's only 2 species in the Notorictomorphia, and these are the marsupial moles. These are marsupials. They are Australian marsupials that have completely evolved a mole-like body plan. This is an incredible case of convergent evolution. They've lost their eyes. They've got a shovelly face. They've got long claws on extremely powerful forelimbs for burrowing. This is a marsupial that has evolved a mole body plan. It is spectacular. If anybody likes marsupial moles, get into it. We're going to talk about a few different kinds of moles here coming up. Also, I love that picture because that is a gecko just being eaten in the most brutal way you can imagine by what I would argue is like a pretty cute little mole thing. So Australia's got its own moles, and those moles are marsupials, independently evolved. The best. Second most, I think, one of them, no, it's not second most, but whatever. Another really rich clade of marsupials are the marsupial carnivores. So these animals are usually the predators that aren't birds or lizards or crocodiles in Australia. So the Desiuromorphs are the marsupial predators. And so I'm sure you guys know some of these animals. So things like the Tasmanian devil is this big predator. It lives on Tasmania, so one of the islands off of Australia, not on the mainland. It does not spin in a tornado to get around like you might have seen in a cartoon. But there's also things like the thylacine up there, which only went extinct in the 1920s. It was hunted to extinction by white people trying to grow sheep in Tasmania and parts of Australia. So that's a real bummer. But then there's other predators here. And yes, Cass wrote big in quotes predators. Most of the big marsupial predators did go extinct as humans arrived in Australia tens of thousands of years ago. So what's left is not like so huge. That's true. And then one of the last groups of mammals, things like bilbies and bandicoots. So you guys probably know who Crash Bandicoot is. So these are just like marsupials out in the open desert of the outback. They kind of hop around like kangaroos, but they kind of do it on their own. They're very interesting to me. They have a very unique ecology, like relative to other mammals. They're kind of like insectivorous rabbits almost. But they have decent diversity. There's 24 kinds of paramelomorphs. And these are their own kind of marsupials out there in the outback. All right, so that was our marsupial diversity situation. One thing I want you guys to take a second on is to imagine how the mammal body plan, so the inherited skeleton that like, especially therian mammals, all therian mammals share, the placental reproduction, the teeth that all therian mammals share. We all inherited the same skeleton back at that common ancestor of Theria. And then because of how the continents were arranged, really, Australia was like its own place, whereas the rest of the world was very interconnected. And so you have placentals in most of the rest of the world. And then in Australia, really just marsupials as the mammals on that landmass. And so as mammal evolution unfolded over tens of millions of years, you had these incredible things happen. I'm sure you guys have seen slides like this before or pictures like this before from a textbook or something, but I'd like you to please like just take a second on your own. You can put stuff in the chat if you want and look at this like figure and see like what it's trying to showcase about mammal evolution like generally. Any volunteers, especially anybody maybe who hasn't said anything yet, like what you can take away from a figure like this, like what this is trying to show? Anybody can unmute if you like.
showing animals that aren't like actually that closely related that have adapted to fill similar niches, probably.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to summarize it, is like marsupial mammals in Australia, and then placental mammals, which we haven't talked about yet, but placental mammals in other parts of the world through time have evolved like extremely similar body plans, because ecologically, functionally on the landscape, they're filling really similar roles. So you have marsupials that kind of look like wolves, kind of look like moles, that kind of look like anteaters, that kind of look like cats, kind of like flying squirrels. All of these animals independently evolved those body plans. Those gliders didn't have a common ancestor that was a little tree-dwelling glider. They both evolved that. Those long ant-eating tongues and digging claws, those two animals didn't inherit those claws and tongues and faces from their common ancestor. They both independently evolved it. So it's really cool because marsupials give us like this like test case almost. It's almost like an experiment. It's like, okay, what if you left the earliest mammals, which are very small, little generalist things, on their own island? Well, they're going to evolve a lot of the same body plans that we see evolve on other parts of the world. So it's just really interesting that mammal evolution kind of like gets to the same place in a lot of ways. There's of course tons of animals that there is no, analog between them, and that's also very interesting. But it is very cool that some of the patterns, some of the body plans evolve again and again and again. I think that's spectacular. It's one of the things that makes biology so interesting. It's like what the rules are, what expectations we can have for evolution. Okay, so that's some marsupial stuff. Now it's time for the big show. us, we are placental mammals. So that fox there has been representing all of the placental mammals. Here is our placental mammal family tree. So you can see Mammalia there at the bottom that leads over to the echidna and all the rest. And then all the rest splits into Theria, and Theria is marsupials. So there's the possum there on the bottom, and then all the rest are still Therians. And that all the rest is placental mammals. And so I know if I send you guys into breakout rooms, you can't see the slide, which is a real bummer, and why I'm kind of bummed like that we're on Zoom for this. But I'd rather have you do now is maybe use the chat, or you can unmute to say things. I'm not going to answer any questions. I'd like you to like talk to each other for a minute or two here. I want to know if there's any surprises here. You guys now can follow relationships back. You can see how things are related. You might not recognize all these animals. I certainly would be surprised if you could recognize all of them. Every single one of these is representing a whole order. So an order of placental mammals. This is how the orders of placental mammals are related to one another. So go ahead, use the chat. Feel free to unmute, just have a conversation. I'm not going to answer anything for a second. Talk about the topology, the relationships among placental mammals, because I think it's fantastic. Please use the chat or just unmute. I want to know what's sticking out to you, or what questions you have, or what you're surprised by with these relationships. So people are talking about the tiger, which of course you guys all recognize the tiger. Tiger representing carnivorous mammals. Doesn't mean you only eat meat, but carnivora is an order. And then yeah, the sister to carnivorans are pangolins, so little armored dudes. So yeah, that is an interesting one. Yeah, marine adapted mammals, things like whales and things like manatees, completely not related at all. They've adapted to ocean life totally on their own. Cass says whales have hooves. That used to be true. None of them today do. All right, we'll get started here because I want to pay attention to what time it is. So anyway, this is our family tree. This is now not even the mammal family tree. This is the placental mammal family tree. So I hope you can tell where we are in here. Yeah, lots of small things near the elephant, right? The elephant line over there has a lot of little tiny looking stuff near it. That's definitely true. So let's go through it. Let's start talking about placental mammals. So placentalia is the clade that we are all in. You guys definitely need to know placentalia. And I want to just show you guys something about the species diversity. So this is like showing you all the different orders of mammal, but some of these orders have way more species than others. And so I'll do this for a couple different clades. It's kind of like, I just think it has a good value to show you guys like that ecological reality. So the thing about mammals is that a lot of them are big and famous, but like those are disproportionately represented in your understanding, I guarantee, of like mammal biodiversity. So you might hear like pretty interesting or scary kind of stats about like a third of mammals are critically endangered, or we might lose half of all mammal species or whatever by such and such a year. You know, there's all these different numbers you might hear. And I always hear people say like, okay, well, that's like bad, but at least, you know, that's not all of them or something like that. And I just like to emphasize the fact that when we talk about most mammals, the ones you think of, giraffes and whales and things like that, are not the abundant and diverse groups of mammals. So here's mammals species diversity wise. 40% straight up of all mammals. This is all mammals. This isn't even just placental mammals. This is all mammals are rodents in the order Rodentia. So that's squirrel there. And then the second most diverse order of mammals is bats. And so if you put together all the bats and all the rodents, you already have like way more than half of all mammal species, just like squirrels and rats and bats. That is a very intense thing to think about. Shrews and moles, again, small-bodied. Almost all of these organisms that are so diverse and so abundant are small, little, furry guys. They have a lot in common with like the oldest, earliest mammals, these small, little dudes. Then primates, so that's our group. So like things like monkeys and apes and humans. Carnivore mammals. Finally, we get to some of the bigger stuff, like even-toothed ungulates. There's those diprotodonts, bunnies, opossums, whales, and then everything else you've seen so far, all the little icons all around there that are really interesting and they're kind of their own orders. Those are very, very, very much not species diverse. This is the distribution of species of mammal. And so when I show you that phylogeny and every order has its own logo, that little squirrel is representing a lot more than its little bunny neighbor in terms of species. All right, so there's back to our phylogeny. Here's placentalia. There's one feature of placentalia that I want you guys to have as a synapomorphy. And it's a little bit vague, and I could have written it a different way, but I think this will work. And that is prolonged gestation. So all placental mammals keep the baby in the uterus and on the placenta for a lot longer than marsupial mammals do, even though marsupial mammals still have the same uterus and placenta setup. And so in a lot of big mammals, so like that baby whale or that baby giraffe, the mother can be pregnant for a very long time, sometimes years, and then give birth to like one single offspring that gets an absolute ton of parental investment. That might be a very successful reproductive strategy, but it has like limitations, right? You can only have one baby at a time. Other mammals have more babies, but like definitely not a ton. So you can see, like, I love that, like, you guys probably don't think about them like this, but like that mother armadillo who's like sitting there with all her babies, struggling to like get to her like little armadillo udders. And then there's some baby rabbits and some baby shrews. And so having babies come out in a relatively more advanced developmental stage than marsupials, that prolonged gestation, that time developing inside the uterus, is an absolute feature of placental mammals. All right, now let's talk about placental mammal biodiversity. So we'll do two of these clades here. So the first one is called Xenarthra. These are the South American placental mammals. These mammals evolved in South America and are almost all still in South America. A few of them have come up into North America. So the first is this order, Pilosa. There's only 10 species in Pilosa. These are the anteaters and the sloths. I'll leave this out here for any reaction to sloths and anteaters. There's a ton we could say about their ecologies and their extremely specialized adaptations, either to anteating or to living a life in trees and eating leaves all day long. So sloths are very specialized on their own. Anteaters are very, very specialized on your own, and there's only 10 species. I have to say that that animal on the left, which is the giant anteater, is like, I think probably one of my favorite animals, just period. I think it's incredible. I love its giant stripe. That is a great animal adapted to busting into termite mounds, busting into anthills, and just sucking up all those little bugs. I'll leave this up here. Somebody said something, but I can't say it. Anyway, sloths and anteaters, they go here. I think it's fun that they're sister to each other. And again, what can I say? We don't have time to say too much. The other clade, the other order of South American placental mammals is called Cingulata. Cingulata is the armadillos. And so some of you guys might think of that animal on the top right when you think of armadillos. That's the 9-banded armadillo. That's the armadillo that has made it into America. So if you go to Texas or Florida or Louisiana, you might see a 9-banded armadillo. So armadillos are super cool because they have evolved a completely independent, only they have it, set of bones in their skin, osteoderms, armor on the top of their bodies. In some of them, it's very, very, very hard. In some of them, it's actually kind of soft, but it's still present. And so some of them can fully roll up into a ball that like interlocks. That one in the top middle there is like an armadillo that can actually make a little sphere. The one that we have in America, the 9-banded, does not roll up into a ball all the way. It just has armor. But armadillos are like pretty intense. A lot of them are insectivores, but some of them eat a little bit of everything, including some meat, believe it or not. So that person there on the left is holding a giant armadillo in South America. And then probably one of the greatest animals that's alive on this planet right now is that little one on the bottom right. That is called a pink fairy armadillo. And so it's a burrower. It digs around in the sand, kind of like a little mole, although it itself is an armadillo. And I know you probably can't quite tell, but if you look closely, there's a tail on the pink fairy armadillo, and that tail has a little club on it like a dinosaur. So it has a like little battering ram tail for its little body. And it's actually related to some of the Ice Age armadillos that you maybe have seen that have like gigantic, they're like as big as Volkswagens, and they have like giant clubs on their tail. So armadillos are their own order, and there's more armadillos than there are for like all the sloths and anteaters put together. And so those two orders are clade together, and they are the South American placental mammals. So Xenarthra is South American placental mammals. And then I bet you can guess where this clade of 6 orders comes from. These are the Afrotherian mammals. Afrotheres are, of course, from Africa. Most of their evolution happened in Africa. Most of their biodiversity is still in Africa. So we'll see how far we get in the Afrotheres today, because I know we're almost at the end of our class here. So here's the first Afrothere we'll talk about. Is this fun name, Tabuli dentata. Again, all these order names you guys are not responsible for. You guys are not responsible for every single order name. I'm just giving them to you so you have them. Only one species of Tabuli dentate, and it is the aardvark. The aardvark, the aardvark, the aardvark. This is one of, again, these great animals that I'm so happy is a living organism that we can look at. So this is an ant-eating specialist, but again, in Africa, so its own kind of thing. We've not seen any African anteaters quite yet. It's got huge claws for busting into termite mounds, really, really good sense of smell, really great hearing. They are so funny and so weird. I would love it if somebody did something with aardvarks because they are wild. Next group up of little Afrotherian placental mammals are these things called elephant shrews. They're also sometimes called sengis. And so this is a radiation of animals that's only in Africa. There's a couple of them that have gone up into the Middle East, but mostly they're only in Africa. I think you can tell why they're called elephant shrews. They've got long noses that are really, really sensitive. Some of them are really fast. They run around in the grasslands and the forests of Africa, and they sense for worms and bugs in the leaf litter. Gobble them up. Some of them are kind of big, you know, like rabbit size, and some of them are very tiny, like that one on the bottom right with its tongue out. Yeah, elephant shrews are pretty interesting. Very interesting locomotion. Some of them kind of hop. Anyway, plenty to look into if you are intrigued by elephant shrews. Sister to elephant shrews is this clade. This is an order called Afrosoricida, and this is a group of animals that is got a ton of diversity in Madagascar. So a lineage of Afrosaurisids made it to Madagascar tens of millions of years ago and has totally evolved within Madagascar. So as an island all by themselves, separate from the rest of the world. Whereas other ones like those golden moles evolved in mainland Africa, and you could find them in the deserts, especially in southern Africa. I think I want you guys to take a second and look at these things. They are all related to each other relative to everything else you've seen or everything else you're going to see. This is a single clade, a single common ancestor for all of these organisms. Some of them are hedgehog-like, some of them are shrew-like, one of them is kind of like almost a little otter that's very voracious. And I hope you can see those golden moles have evolved a mole-like body plan. They've lost their eyes, they have a shovelly face, and they've got burrowing claws. This, I hope, is very striking to you. In Africa, a little group of insectivorous mammals has completely independently evolved so many body plans. That thing on the bottom left is not a hedgehog, it's a tenrec. That thing in the top right is a golden mole. It has no relationship to a mole that might be like in your backyard or that mole that lives in Australia. Independently, mammal body plans evolving the same things again and again on different continents. It cannot be cooler. That golden mole is incredible. That otter shrew thing, which is really a tenrec, that's incredible. That hedgehoggy one is incredible. These animals are crazy. They don't get a lot of play because they're hard to find and they live in the forests, but they are very cool. All right, I see what time it is. So I'm going to stop the lecture here and let you guys go. I will see you same time, same place on Thursday, and we will try to finish up our mammal diversity through the rest of placental mammals. So thank you for coming on Zoom, and I'll see you guys then.